my Fireflies, and welcome back to the Cyan Firefly. It's me, Lyiat, and today I'm going to bring you the TLDR on Game Dev Tycoon. Game Dev Tycoon was released on the 15th of March in 2013 by GreenHeart Games. So what exactly is it? Well, Game Dev Tycoon is basically a game design simulator. You take control of your own game design and development company, and you produce games. It's pretty interesting, though I have to note that it is not the first of its kind. Game Dev Tycoon is heavily influenced by Game Dev Story, and GreenHeart Games has given full credit to the idea to Game Dev Story, so they're not ripping them off, it's just an influence thing. There have been a lot of rumors and nasty stuff being flung about by at GreenHeart Games, and it's all been very inappropriate. These guys have not been hiding the fact that Game Dev Story existed. It's all unfounded slander, so just ignore that kind of crap. So what exactly is there to do in Game Dev Tycoon? How do you play it? Well, I can separate the mechanics into largely two different categories. There's the game design and development aspect, and then there's the team management aspect, the actual running of a company. First thing I'll discuss is the game design and development segment, and then I'll move on to management. Makes more sense that way, otherwise this is gonna fall flat on its face. It's not gonna be a very good commentary. So, first things first, you've started a brand new game, you get to make your own company, you get to name yourself and all the fanfare, and then you realize that you're a very, very poor guy working out of his garage. You have your car in the same room as your office. It's a pretty sad state of affairs. So what exactly do you have to do? Well, you have to design a game and you have to get money. So how do you do that? Well, this entire game is mouse-driven. I want to point that out first things first. So you have to click on your character and you have to hit Design New Game, where you get a number of different options. At the start, you have only a small handful. You have things like your genre, what kind of game you want, and what platform you want to release it for. Again, at the very start, you have very limited platforms. I believe it's restricted to the G64 and the PC. The G64 being, of course, a complete rip-off of the Commodore, but that's its own thing. That's simply to avoid copyright. So after you've gotten all that worked out, you actually move on to the actual game design point, where you actually plan out what you want your game to be. This comes in 3 different stages. And it's all abstract. It's all rather representative of the actual process. You don't actually have to do much. So stage 1 pops up and you get these 3 different sliders, which are engine, gameplay, and story and quests. You have to balance these out to allocate how much development time you are going to spend on these 3 different aspects. Certain games do better with certain features than others. For instance, if I want to make an action game, I have to focus on engine and gameplay, whereas story and quests might not be all that important. And then once you hit submit, you hit OK, you move on and your character will actually start working on the game. Then of course you hit stage 2, same thing, but this time you have dialogues, level design, and artificial intelligence. Again, it's a balancing act. You have to figure out what works for what genres, what works for what type of game. And of course you also have the last stage, I might as well mention that while we're on it, which is world design, graphic, and sound. Now, throughout all this, you also get other options, which are these other features. For instance, during stage 1, you might have access to linear story and save games, which affect how much tech is in your game, its tech score. And linear story will help buff story and quests, and save games would, for instance, help out engine. So you have these kinds of things all to consider. However, your other features will make your game more expensive. So if you don't have enough money, but you really want a feature, then you're going to have to be very careful, because you might go into the red while developing a game and not have any money to spend at all. It's also worth noting that some of these other features are mutually exclusive. For instance, once you get to stage 3, you have the option of, say, basic sound or stereo sound. Of course, you can't have basic sound and stereo sound. You need to pick one or the other. Of course, stereo sound being much more expensive than basic sound. So once you're done all that, once all the stages are completed, your character will spend a certain amount of time polishing the game. This varies for however long you want to do it for. You can just sit there and wait to release the game while your character gets rid of bugs, because your character has generated bugs throughout this entire sequence. And if you release it with bugs, well, yeah, people aren't going to be very kind to you, to say the least. But that's the end all of it. So you wait for the bugs to get out. Occasionally you'll also get blips in technology and design as well, so he'll actually improve the game during the sequence. You might also get a research point or two, but eventually you'll release the game. It'll go out to market. All you have to do is hit the button at the top of the screen, and then people will review it. So you'll get a review score based on how well you allocated your resources, and it's all a big mathematical formula that I do not have the time, nor patience, nor actual intelligence to explain to you all. But you will get a score based on how well you did, and then your game will be sold, which is heavily dependent on reviews. I can't stress that enough. There are other things that will factor into it, like your hype and how well you marketed the game, which is something you have to unlock later down the line. I'll discuss that when we get to management, but mainly it's those review scores. If you do not get good review scores, your game will bomb, you will not make much money, and people will hate you, and you will do worse trying to sell your next game off as a result. You can actually lose or gain fans depending on how well you do. So after you get that all done, you start making lots and lots of money, and then you realize that you still work in a garage. It's very, very sad. So then you go on and decide to upgrade. You move into a nice little place, it's got its own features, it's got more room, and you realize you can hire a team, and you have to start managing a team, and it's great. And this is where the management aspects really start rolling in. Okay, so first things first, it's time to assemble a team. Avengers, assemble! Well, it's not actually as dramatic as all that. Really what you do is that it's kind of like an ad campaign. You set a certain amount of funds. This is how much your recruiting is going to cost you, which determines how good of a employee you want to look for. And then you select from 3 different categories, which represent tech, design, or an even spread, as it were. So you can either specifically look for people with a lot of experience in design work, a lot of tech work, or are a good all-arounder. And that's kind of how it works. Once you hit OK, you submit it, you will gain a small list of employees that you can pick from, and you get their appropriate costs, how much they have in certain skills, so on and so forth. It's pretty straightforward. Now, like I said before, all your team members have their own skills, specializations, and all that sort of thing. You can break it down into 4 different traits, which are their design ability, their tech ability, their relative speed, and their ability to research, all of which you can upgrade. You can actually send them in for training, which costs a small amount of money and some research points. Research points can be used for something else, but we're not looking at that right now. Once they achieve a certain amount of experience with a company, you can then upgrade them with what's called a boost. A boost will allow them to specialize in a specific stage of development, be it, you know, stage 1 with specialty in engines, gameplay, or story quests, or you can specialize them in a certain aspect of stage 2, dialogues, level design, artificial intelligence, and that's how this system works. That's kind of how you do things here. Specialization, of course, making them far more efficient and far better at their specific avenue. This allows you to make larger and larger games, and better quality games. But wait, Lyiat, I've trained all my employees, but I still have all these research points to spend. Well, first of all, if you haven't been spending your research points up until now, well, that's your fault. What you can do with research points is you can research other things. You can research different topics, other features. You can even research how to make a game engine, how to do marketing, all sorts of fun stuff. The tutorial should have covered this, but I don't know. Maybe you can't read. I'm just funning with you. This is a review. This is the kind of stuff you're here for. But yes, research is an incredibly important feature of the game. If you do not do your research, you will not be able to progress in this game with the basic tools that you have. You need to get more advanced technology so you can keep up with the times. You need to be able to remain competitive, and not to mention you do need to unlock different topics, because if you keep on using the same topics over and over again, people are eventually going to get pissed off and they're not going to buy your games anymore because you're just doing the same old thing over and over again. The way you get research points is through various means. You can either do independent contracting, which is kind of a very... it's kind of like the whole design process, but very micro-sized. You need to meet a certain amount of tech and design points within a certain amount of time, and if you do so, you gain a certain amount of money, and if you don't, you gain a penalty. But while you're doing this, you also gain research points. You can also gain research points while designing a new game engine, something I'm not going to really discuss here. Game engines are a really basic feature. Or you can gain research points while developing a game. It all varies, it all depends on how good your company is. I think having a larger amount of speed on your character's skills factors into it. It's kind of complicated. All these things are based off of variables that I really do not understand, as I've already told you. So there you go. Make sure to use and spend your research wisely, and that when you research certain topics, you be aware that it actually has a monetary cost involved with them, like marketing does. So be careful about what you spend, otherwise you could go bankrupt very quickly. And not to mention, you could run out of research points very quickly and end up screwing yourself over completely. I guess I should go on to explain the hype mechanic and the random events, because they kind of go hand to hand. Marketing ties into this as well. So, while you're producing a game, you'll realize that there's this thing called the hype mechanic. It's kind of like this little red bar that appears under the development thing. It's supposed to represent how well known your game is, how much hype you've generated for it. And this can be raised or lowered in multiple different ways. The primary way is through marketing. You basically spend X amount of money and you get a certain amount of hype back for it. It all depends on how big your company is, how many fans you have, and all sorts of other things. The other way you can actually have hype is depending on the size of your game and how many fans you have. That actually generates hype on its own. Finally, you can also get it through random events, or not so random events. Some of the events occur at the same time every year, like G3. But these events can, of course, raise or lower your hype as a result. For instance, depending on how big of a booth you get at G3, you can end up getting a lot of hype or just a little hype, which also ties into how much fans you have. If you have a lot of fans, there's going to be a lot more people showing at your booth than there's not. So what does hype actually do for you? Well, hype is almost, I can't really say it's guaranteed sales, because I've had games with a lot more hype sell not nearly as well, but hype does ultimately increase the amount of sales you will have, regardless of how, well, again, it's all really strange, because it's all based off of these under-the-cover variables that you don't really see, so it's kind of hard to explain. But hype does generally make it so that your game sells more. It doesn't make your game more popular or better, but it does increase sales at the end of the day. Granted, having all the hype in the world is not going to save a bad game. In fact, you're probably going to lose more fans if you have a really hyped up game and it does really poorly. You get really bad reviews on it and you just make a crappy game. So keep that all in mind when you're making a marketing campaign. So if you are selling a very trashy game, if you're not really doing all that well, and you make a global ad campaign, yeah, you could wind up going the way of EA. I guess the last thing I want to address is some of the buzz that this game has gone through recently. There was a big thing not too long ago where GreenHeart Games actually released their title on Pirate Bay themselves. They released a cracked version, but it had a different line of code in it, and this line of code would make it so that if you had the hacked version, if you had the cheated version, that eventually your gaming company would be forced out of business due to piracy. So many people would start pirating your games that no matter what you did, you would go out of your business. And it was a very ingenious way for them to fight piracy. It was actually pretty neat, and I really liked that idea. But they also put in a line of code that sent pings back to them. It told them how many people were playing their game at any given point in time. And it also determined whether or not the games being played were legitimate or non-legitimate. And it turned out that this game had a 97% piracy rate. 97% of the people who were playing the game had stolen it. They had not given GreenHeart Games any money. That is ridiculous. I don't think I've heard of a game with piracy rates that high ever before. And that includes some games that well, I can't really say some games that deserve to be pirated, but games that I would think that would be pirated more than this indie title. Come on, it is an $8 game. Really? This is not a company that screws people over. It is not a company that people have made crusades about. People who stole this game are just dicks. They are fucking dicks. And I have absolutely no problem with saying that. If you are a viewer of mine and you stole this game, you pirated it, you are an asshole. Stop viewing my channel, unsubscribe now. Alright guys, that's all the time I have for this particular title. This has been Lyiat with the Cyan Firefly, recreating Pokemon under the name Pokemon Cyan and making billions of dollars. Okay, it was just a couple of million. I'll catch you next time, Fireflies.